Ah, you are live finally. Hi, everyone. I am so sorry for the delay. Technical difficulties. Everyone's got them, you
Don't
know.
you love technology? It's great. It's wonderful.
It's just been one of those mornings, you know. The camera doesn't work, and the internet's not going on, and so, good morning, Lisa. I don't know anyone else that is here. I appreciate your patience and waiting. My name is Christine Dykman. I am the Workforce Readiness Director for the Garden State SHRM organization. And I am happy to have you here today listening to our guest, Claire Chandler. Claire has been with us before. She is from Talent Boost, and I think she is just the wisest person in the whole wide world. And she has so much wonderful things to share with us, especially as HR professionals, because there are things that we think about, but not necessarily have time to do. And how do we implement them? And Claire has come up with all these things that we really need to pay attention to, but gives us really quick, easy actions to take in order to implement them. So, this is a request, actually. We started talking about something else back in August, and there was a lot of talking about coaching and who was, different books to learn more about coaching, and who has time to read a book. I mean, I like to read. I don't know if you like to read, but those were things that we did talk about. So, Claire is going to talk to us today about coaching and how we can implement a coaching atmosphere into our organization without trying too hard, but paying attention to what we're saying and what we're doing. So, Claire, take it away and tell us a little bit more about how to implement that coaching mindset.
Thank you, Christine. Well, good morning to everyone. And I'm so excited that we are able to do this. We were just talking before we went live about the fact that this seemed like this was going to be so far away when we last sort of talked in August. And as you mentioned, so when we were together in August doing a live event, we were focusing on creating a culture of accountability, right, through this concept of trust and how foundational trust is to leadership that is actually followable. And in the course of that conversation, the topic of coaching came up. And we started to recognize that that was a rabbit hole that we were about to go down. And you quite wisely said, you know what, this is too big of a topic. Let's sort of set that one aside. And I think that was the right call. One of the things that I know that we called out and our great interactive audience called out. And by the way, to those of you who are joining us live, you have big shoes to fill because our last audience was so super interactive and they were chiming in the chat. So please bring your energy as well because that keeps Christine and me super energized.
So true.
One of the things that we kind of noticed, during that conversation was coaching is so needed in organizational cultures, and it is a big gap. And I think one of the things that you just mentioned in your introduction this morning is the fact that we HR professionals in particular are already overwhelmed. We are already at or beyond capacity.
Can I hear a here on that, man?
Right? I mean,
I bet you everybody in the chat would agree. I don't know people that are quiet and listening that haven't participated in the chat, but I bet you're shaking your head. Yep, uh-huh.
yeah. And so, first of all, I want to just kind of pause on that. And I realize that is a pretty obvious statement, but I don't think HR gets enough credit for being at or over capacity. And so I just want to pause for a second just to even recognize those of you who are here live and those of you who are going to watch this recording, that you are making time in your day when you don't actually have time to spare to share in this community and share in this conversation, which is so important. So Keith just snapped his neck, nodding vigorously at the reality that we are at or above capacity. Thank you, Keith. I have a great chiropractor recommendation for you if you need
Me
one,
too.
right? But it's true. We are at or over capacity.
Yeah.
And when you speak to any person in your organization who is in charge of, in addition to their day job, whatever their functional line responsibility is, they're also in charge of managing people. When you ask them also to be a coach, like Keith, they go, oh my God, I'm going to snap my neck, nodding vigorously at like, I just don't have the time. I don't have the capacity.
One more
Yeah.
thing. Just keep loading up my plates. I feel like
Yeah.
I'm at a buffet and there's just no more room on my plate. I'm going to need like 2 or 3 more plates to add all that stuff onto. Yes.
Absolutely. And one of the things that we kind of tapped into during our last conversation, which I think really resonated with this audience, and I hope it will, again here today, is part of what we're going to explore in this hour together is not about layering on top of what you're already doing and what your people managers are already doing. One more task, one more responsibility, one more project. This is not like the year-end performance review that you guys become so popular at this time of year, going around and reminding managers to do their reviews. This is all about how do you make better use of the time you're already spending with the people in the organization.
Well, you know what, Claire, I have a question right here from Kathleen. I mean, she's asking a really very intelligent question. We have people that have been with the organization for a long time, and in a lot of cases, we know we need to be better coaches for those leaders, because I think, you're there for so long, you don't see the writing on the wall. You don't see the speck of dust that maybe a new set of eyes would see. And there's an enormous gap within HR and sales leadership, which has a negative trickle down to those young people that are coming into an organization, that coaching mindset. And so there's a lot of assumptions that might be made from HR or sales leadership with these younger people coming in to an organization. How do you coach them to be better leaders for these new people coming in?
Yeah, the gap is big and it's widening, right? I think there is such an enormous, tangible, painful gap between the leaders in the organization who have ascended through some sort of more traditional trajectory and the people who are trying to rise up and quite honestly need and want different things as part of their culture, as part of their experience, and as part of their career development. And so part of this gap is created because we can't figure out how to talk to each other across generations. We can't figure out how to talk between leaders and individual contributors, and we can't still figure out how to talk between HR professionals and the business. So part of closing that gap is around having better conversations, not more conversations, but better conversations. I think one of the things we touched upon back in August was this whole concept of reevaluating the meetings that you're having and truly questioning whether that's the best use of your time. I coach so many leaders, executive leaders and rising leaders one-on-one. And one of the first things we tackle is their calendar, and to say, stop believing the myth that a full calendar means you're being productive, that a full calendar means that you are bringing value to the organization, and that an empty calendar, or at least a more manageable calendar, in some way reflects that you're not bringing your A game.
I think a lot of people, I mean, that's perfect. I think a lot of people are thinking that they need to have that full calendar in order to feel productive. When did that start? And it's breaking a cycle and a mindset, and change is really hard, and that's changing your mindset to be able to move forward successfully.
Absolutely. Well, and I always kind of ask people when I look at their calendar and you can't even stick a business card in between meetings because it's so tightly packed, right? You can't play your A game if you are constantly in meetings talking about all the work that you cannot get done.
Mm-hmm.
Let's think about that.
I think a lot of us are in meetings and we talk and talk and talk, but then go to another meeting and talk and talk and talk, but then there's no action taking place. And then the following week or month that we meet again, we're talking about the same things because we never had time to take action on those issues because we've been in meetings.
Yeah, so true. And meetings for the sake of meetings extinguish energy. They don't build energy, right? When was the last time you were in a meeting that was so effective and you felt really energized by the conversation, by the consensus that you built, by the actions you identified, only to have to go to your next meeting And then by the time you get out of that far less productive meeting, all your energy has been sapped. This is a vicious cycle. To come back to your question, Christine, I don't know how we got here. I think over time it just sort of built up, and there was this sort of, I don't want to call it peer pressure, but I think part of the problem is it's sort of like clutter in my house. I don't intend to have clutter in my house,
Mm-hmm.
but over time it builds up. And then I have to intentionally take one step back and take a fresh look at the clutter that I have gathered, right? The detritus of my life, the souvenirs of my existence, all the things that I collect and just cannot seem to part with. And it's
I
the same.
think that is a wonderful analogy because it's easy to understand the clutter and the accumulation over time. And when we look at that in a meeting sense, that's definitely parallel. Yes.
Yeah, and Craig, I love what you just kind of brought up as a question. Why the endless number of meetings? Is this a purposeful escape?
Yes.
And I think that is a really spot on question. Are we cluttering up our calendar with meetings because we are that in demand and we are that critical and central to every key business decision? Or are we continuing to allow those meetings on our calendar as a built-in excuse for why we cannot move the needle toward our long-term strategy? And I think we have to
I
ask
want
that
to ask.
question.
Terry had said, time blocking will help. What does that mean? Time blocking.
Yeah, so for me, and I love that, Terrence, and thank you. It's so great to see you again. Time blocking for me is a couple of things. First of all, when I work with somebody about their calendar, one of the first things I say is, what can you remove, right? Because in order to do the things that matter, we have to create capacity to actually do that. And so the first thing you want to look at, and I didn't know we were going to go into time management, but this is so
I know.
key,
I
right?
feel like I'm like, wait a minute. We were supposed to talk about
Well, but that's okay,
coaching,
because
and yet we're
we need a little
not.
we need a little bit of therapy here, right? Because we've got to create the capacity to do coaching the right way. And the only way
Right.
we could do that is if we don't layer it on top of what we're doing, but create the capacity for what matters. And so the first place you look is at your calendar on your recurring meetings. And I will bet you that everybody in this audience has at least a few. And I'm not suggesting you just start deleting meetings, but really be mindful about whether those meetings, first of all, need to be recurring. Second of all, need to be as long or as frequent as they are. So, for example, if you've got a 90-minute meeting every week, what ends up happening is, and there's this principle whose name escapes me, I think it's Parkinson's rule or something, that we expand the space that we're given, right? So if you're given 90 minutes to achieve a goal or consensus, you're going to fill those 90 minutes. If you're only given 30, you're still going to get to the outcome that you wanted in that meeting, right? So, you have a lot of meetings where you walk in and it's a recurring meeting for 90 minutes. You spend the first 50 BSing, doing small talk, and then dusting off the action plan from the last meeting, and then going around the room and discussing why you haven't moved the needle. So the first place you want to create capacity is to take a look at those recurring meetings. Do they need to be as long? Do they need to be as frequent? And do they need to be as populated? We also, over time, have accumulated clutter in terms of meeting participants. For fear of leaving someone out or offending someone by not including them in the meeting. And actually, going back to that earlier comment from Craig, it's sort of like that's a built-in excuse for us as well, not to communicate outside of the meeting. Well, you were in the room, how come you didn't know that? You were in this meeting, how come you didn't move the needle on that action? Right? And so that's the first thing. And this is critical. This is critical before we do anything else as leaders. And this is critical before we do anything else as HR and try to rise to the level of being more strategic and being more forward thinking. We have to create the capacity to do that. And the first place to do that is with your calendar. So recurring meetings are huge. Coming back to time blocking, once you've actually created some space in your calendar, you need to block out time for you to get other stuff done, even if it's only time to think. And I know that sounds foreign. And when I say that to executive leaders, they look at me a little bit askance until it sort of sinks in. You have to block out time, even if it's buffers in between meetings, so that you can have the mental capacity to kind of download what you just committed to, what was so energizing about that decision, and what is the very next step you want to take. And then you also want to create bigger blocks of time to actually do some meaningful work, some thought, some strategy around the longer term objectives. So time blocking is absolutely critical, but in order to get into that discipline of blocking out time, buffers and thinking time and all of that sort of thing, you have to clear out some of that clutter first.
That sounds like a great plan. Okay, let's go forward.
Okay, cool. So
No,
now that you've got,
I think
yeah,
that's a wonderful action, and the time blocking works. I mean, I know some people in our chat have said they use it all the time. They recommend. Pete said, I recommend it to my leaders, the time blocking method, and making sure that the calendar is not bang 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 bang. I think that's awesome. And as you've said, freeing up your own calendar by using that method helps you to be a better coach.
absolutely. Absolutely. And I want to kind of put all that in the parking lot because I think we just identify the topic for the next
So the
LinkedIn
next
Live review,
I
maybe
think that
Q1.
I think that people HR leaders in general feel like, okay, I'm a good leader, and they don't worry about the whole time blocking thing. They worry about the coaching part and being strategic, and all of the formal paperwork that they have to file, and things like that, not so much time blocking.
Yeah.
And like you said, that kind of starts everything.
Yeah. So we'll
Very
kind of park that because there's this whole other piece of that where I get into my leadership therapist role,
interesting.
around getting over the guilt of saying no to certain meetings and all of that. So
Right.
we'll talk about that in a future time. I want to really get back into coaching, but I think that was really important to set the groundwork because, as I said, we need to create the capacity to do better by our employees and by our
Right.
colleagues, right? Because coaching is fundamental. Coaching is has a direct impact on individual engagement in organizational success, and we'll kind of get into that. But I wanted to pose a question to the audience just to make sure you're already interacting in such a great way, and I want to kind of keep that going. I want you to think about when I say, give me an example of a great coach in your life or in sports or anywhere in your universe. Who comes to mind? And you can drop the name if it's somebody we would recognize, or you can just say, if it's somebody in your life or career that maybe we wouldn't know, drop in something to describe them. But what I want to get at is not just the star power of a celebrity type coach. As we're having this conversation, we got news yesterday that the famed basketball coach Bobby Knight passed away. Now, some people would argue, well, he tended to throw chairs, and wasn't there that whole incident where he got one of his players into a headlock, and he was definitely, maybe not all of the characteristics of a coach we would emulate. And I certainly don't want to dismiss those aspects of him, but he comes to mind as an example of a famous coach because everybody knows who Bobby Knight was. But there are a lot of characteristics of his style that perhaps we don't want to emulate. But everyone in this audience, you and I also, can think of great coaches in our universe, on TV, in our direct lives. And so I want to give a little bit of space to really kind of reflecting for your audience on why that coach comes to mind, what makes them so effective. And so while we're waiting for the audience to chime in, Christine, is there a coach? Is there an example of a coaching type of person who comes to mind for you?
It's funny because as soon as you said that, I'm thinking of all the people that I have interacted with, and coaches, but maybe those people are not coaches, but more of mentors. And who do I want to be like when I grow up? That's how I look at it. Like, I really like that characteristic and how they do this, or I want to emulate this characteristic of this person, but then I want to pick and choose that person for this characteristic. So in essence, I have a lot of different coaches, because, or sometimes even mentors. It's not just one thing, just like you had mentioned, well, I don't really like this aspect, or putting them in a headlock or whatever, but I really like the way they handled this, and that's really cool, what they just did, and I want to be like that when I'm in that situation.
Yeah. So I love that answer, and here's why. I think too often we assume that coaching needs to be reserved for a select few who actually know how to do that effectively. But the reality is, everyone has some element of their personality, their style, their experience, their worldview that can be applied through a coaching lens. And so I love the fact that you didn't have this ready-made answer of like one coach that kind of jumped to mind. And those of you who do, that's wonderful as well. And Terrence, I want to kind of key in on what you just contributed. But Ted Lasso. So somebody else just brought up Ted Lasso. Perfect. It's great. I think there are two things, right? I think there are iconic coaches that embody all of the things that kind of formed and informed and imprinted upon us as we were up and coming. And then there are the traits, the interactions, the coaching moments that have happened through a combination of people in our lives. Terrence, you brought up your Little League coach, and I love that you went there, because I was going to use the example of a Little League coach. I don't watch a lot of Little League games until it comes time for the annual Little League series. There is something about watching these young men and women playing a sport that we all know it's America's pastime, and seeing, for me, some of the great moments are when the coach comes to the pitching mound. And there was a World Series a couple of years ago where there was this particularly poignant, you can find it on YouTube, this moment where this coach came out to the mound and his pitcher was having a rough time. I think he had given up the lead. He was visibly upset about it, of course. And the coach did not come out there and, like Bobby Knight, berate him. He came out there. He praised his effort. He reminded him how much he loved him. And he said, you did everything you could. And you hear me getting emotional? Like, it's an emotional thing. And it didn't happen to me.
Right.
But it was something that I had the honor of witnessing. Mm-hmm. And it was an amazing experience. There are so many examples like that of Little League coaches who get it, who understand that their job is not just to get the win at all costs, but it's to form these young men and women through interactions like this, through victory and defeat, that will stay with them for the rest of their lives. And that's what coaching can do.
So how do we take that, Little League coaches? I mean, you were touched by that example as an older adult, not as a child playing Little League. Terry is thinking about his experience as somebody who had a wonderful Little League coach. How do we take that coaching and use it in our organization or other managers that we're coaching? How does it cross over?
Yeah, love that. And I realize that using the example of a Little League coach can put a lot of pressure on would-be coaches in the organization, right? It's like, you mean that a coaching conversation I have is going to stay with someone for the rest of their lives? No, not necessarily. But the time, but it might. If you are mindful, if you lean into the conversation, and if you show up from a place of truly wanting that person to be more fully authentic, more fully self-aware, and more fully in line with where they want to go in their career, right? Coaching conversations are not always about resolving conflict. And I think that's one of the reasons that a lot of leaders within HR and beyond HR tend to resist being thought of as a coach or looking at a conversation as a coaching moment. It's not always about resolving conflict.
You hit the nail on the head, people don't like conflict, and they use the word coaching as conflict management when they are two separate things. They're afraid to have the conversation to coach somebody through that fear, in their own fear of having a conflict conversation.
100%. So let's blow up that myth right now. Coaching does not equal conflict management. That is a completely different thing. That is a completely different type of conversation. Coaching is all about meeting people where they are and helping them understand what they have within them and what they need from beyond them to move forward. That's it.
So, what if we're not the right person to coach them in that situation? That's not our strong suit. That's not our expertise. Looking at little league coaches, okay, he had pitched and he was, let some runs through. And how do you be that coach for somebody that's not your thing?
Yeah. So for me, first of all, I think we all have to get over ourselves in terms of what coaching means, right? Everybody can have a coaching conversation. Everybody. You mentioned mentoring before. I think the big difference between coaching and mentoring, and a lot of people kind of confuse the two, is a mentor has been in your shoes. A mentor has been who you are. A coach, even a little league coach, has not necessarily played every single position on the field, but has this ability to help clarify for people what is the outcome we want you to achieve, and what is
I
it
love
within
that. Can
you.
you say that again? Say that again, please.
The mentoring and coaching.
Yes.
Yeah. Mentoring happens because a mentor has been in your shoes. A mentor has been where you are. Maybe not within your specific company or your specific industry, but in your specific situation. A coach is someone who may or may not have been in your situation, but has some perspective to help you through your own forest.
Okay. Love that. Love that.
And it's a distinct difference, right? And I think one of the so we already kind of debunked the one myth around why people run away from coaching, because they think it means they're resolving conflict, and that's not true. I think the other reason that people have a little bit of the myth that you touched upon, which is, well, I don't have it within me to be a coach. I think everyone has it within them to be a coach. Not everyone necessarily can be a mentor. They are two different things, right? Now, I would challenge that more people can mentor others than think they can, but that's a different conversation as well. Let's really get into what coaching looks like. And one of the other things I think, I want everybody to hear loud and clear is coaching does not have to be a formal relationship, does not have to be a formal arrangement, does not have to be some sort of structured commitment between two parties. It is literally about having more fruitful conversations with the people you're already interacting with. So again, we're talking about this concept of how do we create capacity so coaching is not just one more thing we layer on top. One of the ways you do that is by using the conversations you already have more effectively.
And so let me ask you this, Claire. Claire. Sorry, Kathleen had mentioned that, and I think that a lot of us are among that same mindset that HR was always the last resort. Unless nothing could be solved for time and time and time again through your manager or the supervisors or whatever, that then last resort you go to HR, especially for that coaching. So what does that mean for us as HR professionals helping out our organization, our different managers, our staff, our employees? Where does that put us?
Yeah, it puts us front and center. I'm going to say that bottom line. So Kathleen, thank you for sharing that, because I think you're 100% right. I think in particular in larger organizations, HR is seen as the place you call when you've exhausted everything else. Mm-hmm. And then it becomes a formal request for a coach to be assigned, because now this person is a performance issue, right? And so why this puts us front and center as HR professionals is HR has a unique opportunity to create more of a, coming back to the title of this conversation, a coaching culture in the organization. HR right now is the repository for official, formal, external coaches that you have to invest in. And instead of that, HR is central to, especially those of you who are strategic business partners, already starting to repurpose the conversations you have in the business and showing them through the way that you're showing up how to have a conversation that includes coaching. It doesn't have to be a special, let's set up a separate meeting where I can demonstrate for you that now I'm going to show up as a coach. You don't have to do it that way. You can just sort of understand what it looks like to coach someone, to give them feedback, to help them get through and around and over their biggest obstacles in ways that you can help them discover on their own.
So basically, if I'm understanding you correctly, we're taking our strategic organizational mindset and we're making that strategy on a smaller level for that individual as opposed to the entire organization, so that that individual can grow and add their expertise and their knowledge to the organization to make the organization flourish. So it's part of our strategy for the organization, but coaching is part of the strategy for just the individual.
So it's kind of both, right? And we can kind of talk a little bit about sort of the business impact, the value of coaching. When you think about the end result of coaching done wrong or coaching done not at all,
right,
especially within the business, but of course also, from HR. I'm sure a lot of you in the audience deal far too often with employee relations issues. You call it different things. You call it a coaching conversation, and I think that's why coaching has gotten a bad rap. Because
okay, it's Thursday, everyone. I'm thinking that you've all had at least one or two employee relations issues this week, right?
Yeah. Well, and for most people who have a progressive discipline process, the first step in that process, I'm willing to bet for most of the people in the audience, is the coaching conversation. And this comes back to why so many people run from it and why so many people equate that to conflict resolution or discipline. Yep. And I think that's part of the challenge as well. And one of the very first things HR can do to start to effect a better culture around coaching is to remove coaching from the progressive discipline step. Call it something else. Call it a counseling. Call it a whatever you want to call it. Take coaching out of the framework, because it's getting a bad rap. The other thing you have to do is, and this is a long-term play, there is no quick win here. There's no magic pill other than going out and opening your calendar, even while we're having this conversation, and starting to delete some of the clutter from there to create capacity. But there's a reason that this conversation is called How to Create a Coaching Culture.
Right.
It is not called How to Create a Coaching Structure. It is not about how to implement a coaching framework. I want HR to understand that this is not about creating a new project, a new initiative that you have to go out and sell to the business. This is about demonstrating by example what a conversation that includes coaching looks like. And over time, infecting the organization, one people manager at a time, with how to do this more effectively.
So Craig had mentioned that HR can't do this alone. It has to come from leadership, supporting top down. And if they're ignoring the whole coaching atmosphere, then it's going to be hard or impossible for HR to infect other leaders with some kind of coaching mindset. What do you think about that?
I think leadership ultimately has to not just endorse what HR is trying to change in terms of cultural impact, but they have to participate. They have to lean into it. So I agree with Craig. But I also deeply believe that quite often leaders need to be led. What I mean by that is a lot of leaders, especially to this point in our organizational evolution, did not get there because of coaching or mentoring or orchestrated career development. And so a lot of the, I'll call legacy leaders, have the belief that they got to where they are on their own. And so why would they endorse development or coaching or mentoring or any of these other things that have, in their minds, a high ticket price? And the reason you do that is because the world has changed. The reason you do that is because the workforce, I was having a conversation with somebody the other day about millennials, because millennials get a bad rap. Millennials, don't want to pay their dues, and they don't want to work hard, and they don't want to have a full-time job, and they don't want this, that, or the other. You know what millennials are teaching us if we choose to pay attention to it? How to advocate for themselves. I'm a Gen Xer, and we didn't know how to advocate for ourselves in the workplace. We didn't know how to ask for support. At least for me, I didn't know how to ask for help. And I think millennials and those who are coming behind them kind of get that work is part of their life. It doesn't dominate it. And I think there's a lesson to be had there. But that does not mean that they don't need to be coached, that they don't need to be led or managed, and that they don't need to be corrected when they're going off track. They just need it in a more proactive way, and in a way like that little league coach that says, you did great with this, you stumbled here, we still value you, and you're a valued, you're an appreciated member of the team. I think there are lessons to all of that.
I agree with you. And I think that is a really good example of proper coaching. And going back to what we did talk about before a little bit and what we're talking about now, and Craig had mentioned some books that we could read to learn about coaching and the different methods. I'm wondering how much we talked about communication. How much is listening a part of proper coaching to meet them in where they're at?
I don't know of any type of conversation at all, coaching, conflict resolution, or otherwise, where listening is not an integral component. And I don't know many leaders who fully get that and fully practice that, right? We talk about active listening. We build training around active listening. We talk about all of that. But very few leaders truly practice that. One, because they are so focused on formulating their next talking point. And two, because they don't have time on their calendar, because they haven't done what we talked about in the top of this conversation to create the capacity to truly sit and listen.
I love that.
And I want to drill in on listening for a second, because I think that's a key component. Coming back to HR. HR, again, if you walk away from this conversation with nothing else, hear me when I say to you, I am not challenging you to build a coaching framework. I am inviting you to repurpose the conversations you have and lead by example and demonstrate what coaching can look like, right? There's a big difference. And one of the ways you can do that is, and I think we touched upon this in our August conversation, but it bears repeating, that listening word there. HR is also central to what I call organizational listening. So if you go to any HR professional and you say, what does active listening mean? They get it. They embrace it, and they try like heck in between all of their meetings to do it.
That's true. Right?
But there's a role that HR plays that nobody else does, which is around organizational listening. HR has this unique position where you lean in across silos. You lean in across divisions, across functions, across locations, and across teams. And a lot of times you're brought in a little bit too late when there's a conflict that needs to be resolved. A little bit too late when somebody has just left and now they need to backfill a position. But as you embed yourselves more and more into that strategic partnership with the business, part of your role needs to be around organizational listening, to truly lean in and listen for what are the recurring themes, not just within that division, but then when you bring them back to your fellow business partners, what's happening across the business. And a lot of that can't necessarily be fixed through coaching, but it can be evolved, right?
So how do you take what Craig had said earlier, and combine it with what you're saying now? HR cannot do anything without leadership supporting and taking the lead. So we as HR know that here's a gap. We would like to fill the gap. It's a coaching gap, and our organization would be better off being better listeners, being better coaches, blah, 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 whatever. How do you make that happen for leaders that are not necessarily on board, that are not, listening to you saying this is the way we really need to move the organization forward?
So there are two ways to do that. There's qualitative and there's quantitative. And when you're dealing with leaders, you have to give them both, right? The qualitative is through those trends, as I talked about with organizational listening. When you can kind of aggregate that input and that feedback from the business, where you can now say to the executive leadership, this is what we're hearing from the business. These are the pain points that are getting in the way of their performance, productivity, and profitability. Ooh, okay, tell me more about that, right? Here's some of the pain points, and here's how we can start to solve that. So that's qualitative. The quantitative part is to show them some of the numbers, show them some of the outcome of the leadership that gets coaching, that is practicing coaching, that is demonstrating, through things like higher engagement, et cetera. But here's one of the direct connects. When you do coaching more effectively throughout your organization, the number of employee relations issues that you have drops substantially, right? Employee relations, progressive discipline steps, involuntary terminations, all of those can be reduced and improved by doing coaching more effectively throughout the business. And it doesn't require a framework. It doesn't require some program. It requires HR, again, to repurpose the conversations they're having with the business to show them they're overthinking this. They're overthinking this. Do not wait until you have a gotcha moment with one of your people to then bring them into a progressive discipline conversation, because by then it's too late.
That's true. That's absolutely true. It's too late at that point. So how do you change the organization from a bunch of managers to leaders that are using coaching mindset? How do we change that?
Yeah, so I'm gonna give you a little bit of homework. So Gartner does some amazing research, and one of the things that they have really done some good white papers around is around manager effectiveness. Craig, I think you are 100% right. People managers right now are being asked to lead, but they are actually rewarded by managing.
Yay! I agree. Yay!
Right. And I'm going to come back to this in a moment, but I have to get on a soapbox for just a mini little rant. Executives come to me all the time and they complain that their people, their direct reports, their VPs, directors, et cetera, don't collaborate. They don't work together effectively. And they come to me and they go, why is this? And they don't like the answer I give them, because I answer it with a question and I say, how are you incentivizing them? Because if you're incentivizing them to achieve vertical performance metrics, right? So within their team, they have to achieve this outcome. Within their division, they have to achieve that outcome. But you're expecting them to collaborate horizontally.
Yeah.
Coming back to Craig's point, you're asking them to lead, but you're paying them to manage. You're paying them based on vertical achievements and accomplishments and outcomes. And so most executives don't like to hear that answer, because there's no easy button. They want me to go, oh, I have a program for that. If I had a program for that, I could sell it for $1 million a pop, but I don't. I don't have a magic pill. Working on it, but I don't have it. But to come back to Craig's question, which I think is the crux of this conversation, in what the Gartner research kind of reinforces, we have to create capacity. Because first of all, there are, and we're not going to want to hear this either, but it is the truth, and you guys are feeling the impact of this, not everybody who is in charge of managing people is meant to manage people.
I
Now,
think you're speaking to the choir on that one, Claire.
right now,
A
that does
lot
not.
of us are kind of like
I mean,
transplanted, and here you are, and take over, be the HR person, and
yeah,
you got what you got.
right. And I think, part of what the Gartner research has shown, and I wholeheartedly agree with this, we have spent as HR too much time, too many years, and too many dollars trying to upskill managers on how to be leaders. And really what we have to do, first of all, is make sure we've got the right people in those roles. And second of all, we have to help. Keith, I'm gonna assume that was sarcastic. And second of all, we have to help managers create the capacity to be better at managing people. When they are more effective at managing people, when they are not burnt out, when they are not feeling like all they're doing is fighting with their people, then we can show them how to lead.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I really think that would be an easier sell to those leaders, the coaching aspect, because we are showing the value of doing so and taking out that fear of conflict. I think that would be beneficial to many conversations with the managers and leaders. And in effect, as Terry had said, leadership, coaching is part of leadership, period. You can't be a leader without the whole coaching part. And I think that they would be better leaders because of that statement.
100%.
Is it possible, Claire, that you had mentioned this Gartner report, and I agree with Craig. Could you share where we could find that information so that
Yes.
we could read it over and maybe even share it with our staff?
Yeah, I will. Thank you, Craig, for that question. It is a great read, and just to go to Gartner and try to sift through all of their great reads would be very time consuming. I will post that into Christine after the event. If I post it into the comments,
Okay.
will it still show up?
Yes.
Okay.
On the LinkedIn. Yes, absolutely.
Okay. I will do that. Absolutely. Yeah, it's a great read. It's a sobering read because I think it reinforces a lot of what we're already feeling qualitatively, but quantitatively it's going to hurt because it basically just says all the time and energy and effort and investment you've been spending on trying to upskill people has been sort of a waste. That we really have to create capacity. So, but again, coming back, Christine, to your question, and Craig, to your earlier comments, this is some of the stuff that we have to hit leadership with. We have to make executive leaders understand that the way that they are running the business is actually running managers into the ground. And if we are expecting them to just all of a sudden become these great, inspiring, followable leaders, we have to give them the capacity to do that. And it starts with giving them an easier way to coach their people, interact with their people. And, if the word coach has an irreversible negative connotation, then fine, let's come up with a different word, right? If it is permanently associated with progressive discipline, then come up with a different word. But let's stop overthinking what coaching needs to look like.
I like that. I like that. And you know what? In some organizations, you are correct. Coaching is scary, and it has that negative connotation, and it doesn't have to be, and it shouldn't be. But yet, some people again associate it with that conflict. And when we change mindsets, then we change how they're using those actions and those words for the better, I think.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I know we're running short on time, and I want to make sure that there is time for any other questions. But one thing I want to kind of just pose to you, Christine, and to the audience is, what's the phrase, what's the sentence that if you heard it every day would keep you going? And I want to pause there just for like 5 seconds so you can think about that for you personally. I don't want you to share it necessarily unless you want to drop it in the chat. That's great. But what's that sentence, that sort of affirmation that keeps you going, that if only somebody said it to you, it would mean the world. It would give you that energy, that momentum, that motivation, that self-worth.
I like what Keith is saying, to not coach, but to coach up. And sometimes that means recognizing that, and I do say it often, you are allowed to make mistakes. You are human. You are not God. You are not perfect. You are not all encompassing, never going to make a mistake. It's okay if you make a mistake, as long as you try not to make it again. And you might make it again down the road, but did you put forth your effort to try and do the best that you could? And that kind of goes to what you witnessed on the Little League mound. This is what you did awesome, and this is what you really need to work on, but we're still proud of you. I think that that is something that is inspiring, and it gives you validation that you are on the right track.
Yeah, and I think too often managers, first of all, underestimate the power of their words. We know as HR professionals, the biggest impact and the biggest driver of engagement is an employee's direct relationship with their direct manager. We know that. But if you just say that to a people manager, they go, yeah, that's noise. I'm already saturated. I have too much work, right? And I'm too busy resolving employee issues and conflict. And it's like, all right, we need to help them create capacity to get back out in front of that, because they're just playing whack-a-mole and they're responding and reacting to problems farther downstream. They need to get upstream, and they need to solve what's creating that in the first place. And part of what's creating that, potentially is we're hiring the wrong people. Potentially it's we're putting them in the wrong roles. But we're also underestimating what people need to hear and understand and believe in order to keep going.
And I think I agree. I think when they hear those things, and they know that it's sincere coming from somebody else that is in a position of authority, whether it is a manager or a manager of a different department, or a leader, not even a direct person, but then you have that inspiration to keep going, to do better. Everything. I think everybody needs that as a human being.
100%. And it's why I kind of posed that question, and it's a little bit of homework for everybody on the call, to think about, what is that keep going phrase for you, that you that makes a difference for you, that resonates for you, and that truly does keep you going. And I want you to hold that phrase for a moment and understand what that phrase is. And then I want you to turn around, Terrence. I love that one. You got to believe. Mets, baby. I want you to try using that phrase with someone else. So, for example, if the phrase for you, and Christine, you referenced this just earlier, is I'm proud of you. Yeah, you stumbled here, you fell short, but I'm proud of you. If that's what keeps you going, try that out on someone else. Mm-hmm. Because if it resonates with you, I guarantee you it's not going to offend somebody else. And it's a gentle way, it's an easy way for you to start to understand what coaching can look like. Because it doesn't have to be a formal conversation on your calendar called a coaching conversation. It can be as simple as sharing with someone else what resonates with you and keeps you going.
Quick question for you, Claire. I know that we are towards the end of our program, but I have to ask, if we as HR people do what you're saying, and we start to be a better coach, and we're more vocal about it, do you think that managers are going to say, oh, go see HR because they'll take care of it, as opposed to adopting that mindset themselves?
I don't think they're going to do it more. They do that now. Let's be honest, right? Managers right now punt the issues they create.
Yes, they do.
Right? They bring all the dumpster fires to the HR department, and they say, I have an employee who's absolutely useless, who doesn't perform, who doesn't do this, And what's the first thing we always say? Where's your documentation, right? So how about for us in HR, we repurpose the conversations we're already having. I know I've said that several times, but I really want that to sink in, and get out in front, get farther upstream, and say to, managers that we're dealing with anyway, anybody starting to drift off the path before they become, before they get on HR's radar as a disciplinary issue, anybody starting to veer? And then have a conversation with that manager to say, what conversations have you had with them? And take out coaching if you need to. Take out that word. That's fine. Let's not create a mental block around what that conversation can look like. But kind of troubleshoot with them before that employee goes on a formal process. Mm-hmm. And if we do that more and more, and this is, again, not about you adding to your list, walking around the building and having new conversations with managers. It's about having different conversations in the time that you're already spending with them.
Okay. All right. So is that our homework then?
There's probably a lot of homework right now, but your homework absolutely is take back control of your own calendar and then coach your managers on how to do the same. Remove that excuse that they don't have time to do this, because this is what's going to save your company, reduce employee relations issues, increase retention and engagement, and ultimately, organizationally, increase your profitability.
That sounds great. To make our jobs easier.
Wouldn't that be nice?
Oh my goodness. And less things on our calendar. Wow. What concepts.
But as I said, as soon as you remove something from your calendar, block out that time so somebody else doesn't fill it with some other recurring meeting.
Right.
Little pro tip.
I love that. Well, okay. Thank you so much. I appreciate your time today. And again, a wonderful session. Great insights that you shared. And I think that we would all love to hire you. Just kind of walk around and sit on my shoulder. And no, don't say that. Yeah, that's great. Do this. Don't do that. Okay, don't take that meeting.
Yeah,
we can all use that.
I mean, that's literally how I coach my leaders right now, and how I advise them is being that whisperer in their ear. So yeah.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. If you would like to re-watch any of this session, it is being recorded, so you'll be able to see it on my own page, LinkedIn Live, and you can look at it there. You can look on my YouTube channel, youtube.com/c/helping clients to see the light, or Christine Degman. Either way, you're going to get there, and it's recorded on that YouTube channel as well. So you have multiple opportunities to view it again. And I thank you so much for coming out and learning a little bit more about how to increase coaching in your organization. And we will touch base with you at the end of this session. And I appreciate you coming.
Thanks, everyone.
All right. Take care, everyone. Thanks so much. And we'll see you next time. All right. Bye.